Edifice of Trust podcast. The Edifice of Trust podcast is a thoughtful discussion of today's current events from the perspective of America's founding principles. Today's episode is called Building Blocks. I think by the time you finish listening to this podcast, you'll understand why I called it Building Blocks. Recently, I was watching a BBC television series hosted by Bethany Hughes called Modern Geniuses, or Genius of the Modern World. And in this particular episode, she was profiling Karl Marx. And that led me to think a little bit about the nature of exploitation and surplus. Let me explain. Marx had a very dim view of surplus. He believed that surplus, which he called capital, was derived from the exploitation of the workers whose physical labor produced all the products necessary for life in the modern world. He even opposed the capital that was used to purchase the great machines that were necessary to create all these products of modern life, because those machines were created only to increase productivity, which generates more surplus, and not to improve the lot of the workers. Marx propounded the labor theory of value, wherein the economic value of a good or service was based on the amount of labor necessary to produce the good or service. If the employer of the labor could increase the economic returns due to the utility of the product, that would increase demand, or the scarcity of product, which would reduce the supply, surplus would be created. The amount of surplus appropriated by the employer was unjustifiable exploitation of the labor of the worker, according to Marx. Modern progressives carry on this Marxist tradition. They believe the profit employers and investors receive is not legitimate, and is therefore subject to expropriation through taxes so that it can be redistributed to deserving workers. In his 2012 hit, Shackled and Drawn, famous celebrity and 0.01%er Bruce Springsteen sang, "Freedom's sun is a dirty shirt, the sun on my face and my shovel in the dirt. Shovel in the dirt keeps the devil gone. I woke up this morning shackled and drawn." Obviously, he sang it much better than that. But ditch digging, although it takes a lot of labor, is not highly valued. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Springsteen would not want to receive ditch digger wages for his concert performances. He actually made about $60 million last year. Furthermore, I'm pretty sure that even though his bandmates and other workers at the concert sweated as copiously as Mr. Springsteen, he received the lion's share of compensation. That's classic exploitation, don't you think? But Karl Marx, and ipso facto Bruce Springsteen, was fundamentally wrong about the nature of surplus. All civilization on this planet is based on surplus. Without surplus, we would spend most of our lives searching for berries and running from predators. Let me explain my thinking on this. Primitive man, except for a few chipped rocks, was little different from the other animals that roamed the forest, plains, and savannas of the prehistoric world, with one exception. Our primitive ancestors learned to talk to each other. Speech not only allowed tribal members to communicate, it also allowed one generation to teach the next about the pathways of the forest and the predators of the savanna. All other animals are chained to their instincts. Speech was the tool that created the first form of surplus, knowledge. But the oral transmission of knowledge is limited. Ancient Greek bards had to perform prodigious feats of memorization in order to present the 170,000 words of the Iliad to the throngs of Greeks gathered to hear the poem. Oral transmission is easily corrupted. Writing was developed to facilitate the accurate transmission of information. Not of poems, however, but of inventories of agricultural stores in ancient farming communities. Farming was the next great generator of surplus. By necessity, farmers must generate a surplus to provide food for the winter season and for seeds for the planting in the spring. But this level of surplus is insufficient. Granaries must be protected and the weather gods must be appeased, so the surplus must be sufficient to feed the soldiers and priests as well as the farmer's family. And the soldiers and priests needed to make sure the farmer was providing the correct amount of surplus, so writing was invented to keep track of the surplus. The farmer's surplus allows for specialization of labor, not just the soldiers and priests, but also blacksmiths, teamsters, artisans. As the surplus grew, more specialization could be supported so that in addition to meeting our material needs, we could address our spiritual needs, poets, artists, musicians. These are in short supply in primitive subsistence societies that produce little surplus. The written word, especially after the invention of the printing press, has created a storehouse of knowledge much greater than could be absorbed by any one brain. This surplus of knowledge allows us to build upon the works of earlier scientists, to expand our understanding of the physical universe, and to create all the technology that makes up our modern world. Despite Marx's disdain, as well as that of the progressive left, for money and capital, money is only another tool to manage surplus. It is much easier to pay the soldier guarding the granary in coins instead of giving him a sack of grain and a bushel of vegetables. Besides, he would probably prefer to take his coins and buy a pint of ale. It is true that a barter economy can be developed so that exchanges can be made without resorting to money, but bartering is very inefficient and time-consuming. The time and effort put into barter takes away productive time that could be used to create surplus. Marxian thought rejects innovation and increased productivity because these factors increase the capitalist's ability to extract more surplus from labor. Socialism seeks to eliminate most surplus from the economic system, and what is left is appropriated by the state for state-sanctioned uses. All productivity growth from surplus in the Soviet Union was dedicated to the military in order to keep up with the rapidly growing power of the West. This is the reason why conflict between socialist and free market societies is inevitable. They just can't keep up. Surplus provides the building blocks with which civilization is constructed. You may not like our civilization and wish to tear it down, but you will need surplus to rebuild something to take its place. Thank you. Don't forget, my latest book, 2017, A Trumpian Year in Review, is now available in paperback and ebook versions on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iBooks. Also available are my previous publications, Principled Policy and Edifice of Trust. And if you want some adventure, try my novel, Tawantin Suyu. More information on these books, plus links to retail outlets, is available on my website, www.edificeoftrust.com. Thank you. Welcome back. The big question is, why am I wasting my time and yours talking about something really boring like surplus? But if you think about it, the history of the human race is really a story about the accumulation of surplus. All the great civilizations of the past were built on the accumulation of surplus. Kings and emperors were very good at expropriating the surplus created by their people in order to build their palaces and fancy gardens. But those princes of the past didn't offer much in exchange for the surplus they expropriated, only a slash of the sword or a tip of a spear. But things are different in the United States. As Enlightenment philosopher John Locke said, government has no other end but the preservation of property. And that property was created by the surplus from your labor. Other people want the surplus that you have created, and if we don't have a system of rules and laws, then we're going to be living in the state of nature described by Thomas Hobbes as nasty, brutish, and short. In modern society, we exchange some of our surplus for things that we need to live with, food, clothing, and shelter. And these things are actually derived from the surplus created by other people. The exchange of goods and services by people is the essence of our modern free market economy. Unfortunately, there are people who want to take your surplus by force or by cunning. These people are robbers, thieves, or con men. And then there's government. Within the social contract, citizens cede a certain amount of their power to the government, And this is the government's ability to expropriate a portion of your surplus for the purposes of the state. But the government offers services in exchange for the expropriation of your surplus. These services include common defense, domestic tranquility, and the provision of justice among people. These government services promote the general welfare and are in the public interest. The ability of the government to expropriate surplus from citizens gives the government great power, and this is the reason the founders tried to limit the power of government. Citizens deserve a government that helps them preserve their surplus and doesn't expropriate it except in the public interest. There are people, however, who see this great power of the government to expropriate surplus and want to use that power to their own private or special interests. How is this done, you might ask? Well, some people try to delegitimize surplus in order to justify its confiscation by government. In the next podcast, we will take a look at how some people try to delegitimize surplus in order that they can take the surplus that you have created. Thanks for listening to my podcast. If you would like to hear more Edifice of Trust podcasts, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.